Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. Today we're doing a show and tell of the Loopy Meander, and it is a fun one. This is one that looks great on any whimsical fabric, any kids quilts, looks great in borders. I have such a fun time with this design and I've been using it since the very beginning. We're going to bring back Snowpocalypse for the last time to take a look at how I use that in my third quilt ever to do on the long arm, because it is just a very versatile design. As always, make sure you go grab the pattern to go with this free motion quilting course. There are different instructions for if you're doing it on the long arm versus on your home sewing machine, so make sure you're paying attention to that. We have stencil kits where you can get these designs down and develop that muscle memory, and then afterwards you can have any number of combinations, which you have seen many times and you're going to see more of today as we do these show and tells, because it's just a jumping off point. Once you know how to do the stitch, once you know how to work your way around so you don't quilt yourself into a corner, you can create any number of combinations and scales and densities to make it every quilt pop and really have a lot of fun with your quilting. Also, we've got the kits available so you can practice using solid fabrics so that you can really see your stitching. It can be the star of the show. And then also you're going to be able to really focus on getting the stitch right and practicing on that without having to be distracted by not being able to quite see what you're doing because you maybe have a busy fabric that you're working with. All right, let's take a look at Snowpocalypse so you can see how these stitches really are very versatile. It was the third quilt I ever did on a long arm, and it just shows you that these combinations are great if you are a brand new beginner or if you've been quilting for like a decade or more like I have. All right, so this time we've already looked at the center with the stipple. For this one, we are looking at my skinny border where I did my very first loop-de-loop design. I like to kind of call this one the flight of the bumblebee because I feel like it's all going around. And is it perfect? Absolutely not. But you know what? It looks great, and this quilt gets used every single January, no matter what. Let's take a closer look. Oh yeah, I want you to look at that one right there. See how this one comes all around nice and then pops out, and this one just kind of like, I don't know, I kind of forgot what I was doing, that I was supposed to come down and then come back up. My tension is a hot mess. But you know what? It doesn't matter. It does not matter if you mess up a few of them. It looks great. This is that 2-inch border one that we did, and it looks really good, and it's fun, and it's not uniform, but it's okay. It's okay. It looks good. This quilt still gets used all the time, and you don't have to be perfect your first go around. As long as you are learning and improving every time you do it, and it looks better at the end of the quilt than when you got started, then you have accomplished something. You should feel proud of that, and you should show it off with the same enthusiasm that my 7-year-old showed off her first quilt on the long arm, even though it too was far from perfect. We need to remember that excitement of being a child and trying something new for the first time and being excited about it, and panic less about, oh, it's not perfect, the quilt police aren't going to like it, maybe the people at show and tell at Guild aren't going to like it so much because, you know, I'm not going to win an award with this. Who cares? Who cares? Are you going to love it? Are you going to use it? Are you going to put it on your bed every January since you've made it like I have with this one? Is it going to keep you and your family warm? That's all that matters. That is all that matters when it comes to quilting, is whether you like it, whether you learn something from that project that you can take into your next one, and that you and whoever you share that quilt with appreciates it and loves it. So that is all that matters. All right, let's take a look at some other ones. All right, this is the Wonky Star Quilt. This is the very first quilt pattern that I designed to go with Stashin' with Stephanie. We had started the subscription club, and my husband was doing okay. He's like, do you think you could do a pattern every month that was like free for members? And I was like, hold my beer. And I think we have done, oh gosh, that would have been probably at least 3 years ago. So at least 36 patterns, one new one every month, most of them in multiple sizes, where we design it, we make it, we quilt it, and we get it out to you guys and do a video tutorial on it. And it's just like, is crazy town, but it's a lot of fun. So this one, I designed it as a baby quilt size. There were like 2 distinct colorways with this one, so I used the ones that look like purple for a nice little baby quilt. And I wanted to separate the stars because everything is so low volume in this. It's kind of hard to even, and it's like a scrappy low volume background as well. It's sometimes hard to differentiate this light lilac from that low volume background. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see a little closer what I did and how I use the quilting to help make this design pop. All right, so I used ruler work in the center of that star to really help define it. It really helps set that apart from that background, especially when you can't always tell. And then what I did is I did sort of a smaller scale Loopy Meander to fill in that background and really just work my way around the quilt. And this is where you kind of have to learn how to work, because I can tell as I'm looking at this that I quilted this section separate from this section. And yes, definitely. So I could tell that I kind of came down around here and went up, and then above my star, and then I filled in the bottom of the next star, and then came down, got to here, and went around. So when I started up again, like I was coming from beneath the star and did this whole section. So that is just going to depend on what you can get to. So when you're working on your domestic sewing machine, you kind of have a little bit more freedom. You can move around a little bit more, but you do still, you don't want to be unrolling a ton as you're moving and pushing stuff around. If your quilt as you go, no big deal. Just treat each one separately and then add some sashing and put them together. But with this one, if you're doing it on the long arm, you're only going to have so much that you can work with in that long arm throat. And so you're going to have to make sure that you are not quilting yourself into a corner. And it actually looks like I did. It looks like I started a loop right here because I must have quilted myself into a corner somewhere, somehow, and got off. But you know what? You really can't tell. I never would have noticed that unless I was like specifically looking at it for the show and tell video, because all I see is the texture of the loop and the texture of that star with that very angular ruler work, and it really looks cool and it's fun. Nice low volume baby quilt and a really cute one. And we did more mixing on this one too. You can see that I did a nice straight line going straight down here that you could do with a walking foot if you're doing your home sewing machine or ruler work on the long arm, and then wavy lines on the outside. And that too was inspired by the lines that I see here. There's some clouds that are kind of looping around and kind of curving as well. So I wanted to kind of emulate that in the quilting as much as I could. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. If you're spending so many hours piecing this quilt top, you do not want to just then whip something out that's some giant, huge, all over stipple meander. Give the top the time that you gave, or for quilting, the time that you gave the top, because then you can really make this come to life. And we go from having a quilt top where these stars really could have gotten lost if I would have just done an all over design, to something where the quilting helps make it stand out because that low volume is so close to the value of the purples as well. So I hope that gives you some ideas and maybe gives you some motivation to try something new and fun to help really make your blocks pop and your quilt pop and take the cues from the fabric. So this quilt is called Charm Squared. It's made from 2 charm packs. This was designed pretty early on into my professional career as a quilter. I was able to work with Clothworks to create it and bring it to life, and we had a lot of kits available at the time. And it was made with laurel birch. And at the time I was doing a lot of black background because we were using a lot of bright batiks and bright laurel birch, and it just really pops against that. So I wanted to really make sure that I was then also having some fun with the quilting of this. And I think this may have been one of the last quilts that I quilted where I was renting time on a machine versus purchasing my own machine, because I know for a fact that I do not have this rainbow variegated thread in my stash and never have. So I think that I probably did that. But what I still wanted to do was make sure, one, that I was treating this differently from a thread perspective, because I wanted to use this rainbow variegated so that it would just sort of add to the rainbow color craziness of the Laurel Birch charm pack that I used, and then use a nice black thread in the background so that way it wasn't like popping. Because if I use that rainbow variegated thread everywhere, then my background would be taking away from the fabric here. So that's another reason why sometimes you may want to treat your background separately than the quilt design and the pattern fabric, because otherwise it might just detract if you are not changing thread colors out and changing your designs out. So let's zoom in a little bit so we can take a little closer look at the texture. All right, so I think we can see from this point, it's probably a little hard with the dark fabric, but I have some big swirls that are going in here. They're probably like medium to like medium large swirls, and they are just kind of going all throughout the background. I would have quilted the entire background first because that's the biggest piece usually that you're working with, and then I would have come in. This was before I had access to anything that would allow me to do ruler work, so there's none of that in here. There's no outlining. It is just straight working my way through. So I can tell by looking at this that I quilted the whole section over here, and then I traveled over the tip to make my way through this whole section, and then I actually traveled up and got a little bit of this section as well before making my way back down. Actually, it looks like I actually went up here, filled in, came back down, filled this whole section, and then went on my way. So that is something that you just kind of learn as you go of how to work around that quilt. You know, how is the best way to fill this out? And that's going to be different on the long arm versus on the domestic, and you're just going to have to kind of feel that out yourself and then go with instinct once you've done more of it. If you're doing a big quilt. If you're doing quilt as you go, then it's always going to be block by block. But a quilt like this, you could not do quilt as you go with because it's not your traditional block structure. Then for the background, or for the main piecing area, that's where I did the loop-de-loops. And this is not my best example of loop-de-loops because the scale is all over the place. I've got really tiny loop-de-loops up here, followed by really big ones here, and then small. And there really is not a lot of rhyme or reason to where I had big loops versus small loops. Like, I did not repeat that pattern in this one over here or any of the others that I can tell. I was just kind of haphazardly doing loop-de-loops, and they're not all great. And that's fine. It is okay if they're not all perfect because you have a finished quilt. This quilt was on the cover of a quilt pattern. It was in quilting magazines when I was first coming out as a quilt pattern designer. I was featured in several quilt magazines with this pattern in it. This, I believe, hung at Market as well, or at least some variation of this did. And so you do not have to be perfect. This is very good, and you can be happy with that. And this was maybe, I don't know, 2-3 years into my quilting journey of working on a long arm, and I wasn't doing it that often because I would have to go rent time, and that costs money, and I would have to work with the schedule of the people who I was renting time on the machine of and coordinate that with my schedule and my husband's schedule because he had to watch our daughter in order for me to be able to go do that. So it was just like a whole big thing if I was gonna like go rent time on a long arm. And so I wasn't getting a lot of practice, and practice is key to becoming really good. And that's why I think that I have developed as much as I have as a quilter, because I'm doing usually 1 to 2 quilt tops a month. And that is usually about, 8 hours or so per quilt top if it's going to be a lap to twin size for me. Sometimes there are more. There's definitely quilt tops where I clocked it and I spent 37 hours quilting that top. And I've done that before, and it's intense. It's beautiful when it's done, but not every quilt needs that treatment. Sometimes this is perfectly fine where you have a big meander that is not all over. I call it like a light customization, because you are using different threads, you're using a different stitch, so you can create different texture and help separate that. But it's not like you're doing this an award-winning thing, but it is still very good, and it does still work for a lot of your purposes. So that's a cool one. That one's fun. You can use up your charm packs with this one. It's called Charm Squared. So I wanted to include this one because it is a really basic loop meander. It's like what you would do in that 2-inch border. I think it's about 2 inches going diagonally across here. But I wanted to show it to you because it shows how your thread choice can really make a big difference in how your quilt looks in the end. This quilt, I cannot for the life of me remember the name of it. I know it was featured in a magazine, and I can't remember the name of the magazine right now either because I've been fried and I've been filming for several hours today. But the magazine is out of, this particular issue is out of print, and we did not reissue it, so I don't think you can get the pattern anymore. But it is a good example of quilting, so we're going to show it to you today. So let's zoom in so you can see it. All right, so if you were doing this on your home sewing machine, you could just, line up your strips and just go top to bottom, no problem. But when you're doing it on the long arm, you have your pass and you have to work within that pass. So there were a lot of stops and starts for me in this one. So you can see right here and here where I've kind of done my loops and then I've come off into the side and then I picked it up right over here. And if you work your way down, you're going to see that a lot. So you can see here's another stop and start and a stop and start. And so that's where that long arm pass is, because you're working side to side. So I would just kind of quilt off to the side, do my start and stop, secure my stitches, and then when I advanced it, kept going on the next section. And that is, if you're going to do something like this, you're committing to a lot of stops and starts if you're doing it on the long arm. And that's okay. It is what it is. Turned out really cool, but there's more to even look at here. So one thing that I did is I changed threads a lot in this one. So obviously we have all the background is white, so I would have done that first. And then we have a nice blue section here and here, so I did blue thread there. And then as it transitions into a color, you can see that I also have changed colors. So here is a really good example of that. We can see that I've done my loop meander to go up to here, and then I stopped. And then my purple, I changed threads and picked it up right over here and went and kept on going. And I did that for every single color change. It was intense. And I remember I got the entire quilt off the long arm and realized I missed an entire section and had to load it all back on and redo it. This is not for the faint of heart. I remember quilting this until like 2, 3 in the morning the night before I had to ship it off for the magazine deadline. But it looks fabulous. I'm going to zoom out so you can see. I mean, when you look at this fabric and this design is the star of the show, because even though it has that same loopy meander texture all across, because of those thread changes and because I kept the same density all across, what you see is you see the colors changing from blue to purple to pink and then to orange. And the quilting accentuates and does not detract from the design or the fabrics that you've used. And that's really important. A lot of times we pick fabrics because we absolutely love them and we don't want to do something with our thread choices or our color choices that's going to take away from that. If we go back to the first show and tell we did with the stipple meander, and I showed you my very first quilt that I did, or the second quilt that I did ever on the long arm, and I picked a very pink magenta thread and it had a white background and then the thread bled and all you see is that thread. That's all you see. It's such a cool design. I worked really hard to get the points all together with those colors. I worked really hard in curating my fat quarters to make that quilt look great, and all you see is really purple thread everywhere, and that is not what you want to have happen. You want your quilting choices to accentuate and help it out. Now, of course, sometimes you want the quilting to be the star of the show. Obviously it is for our entire series because I'm quilting everything in white thread, but sometimes you just need it to help accentuate, help bring that quilt to life, really have a lot of fun with it. So this is a good example of when changing threads a ton of times can be very beneficial to you, and you might want to consider it to help make that quilt pop. So thread choice in combination with your design choice, you can really have a lot of fun with this. All right, so this quilt is called Dot Dash, and we redid it in a Halloween line from Art Gallery Fabrics this year. And I had a lot of fun quilting spider webs into this one. And we have a video tutorial that shows you how I did this. You can watch it in real time as I did it. But a reason why I pulled it out for this show and tell is because I use loop-de-loops to connect all of my designs of my spider webs, and that is a really great way to use loop-de-loops. I've done this many times for other things as well, because it is a really easy way to move around the quilt, and if you have a whimsical fabric like this one, it totally fits. All right, so we can see my spider web ended over here. So then I looped around and did my thing and kind of swooped around, kind of came back over and filled in. So here I had looped around the top, made my way over to the top of the next guy, and then continued my next spider web. So there are usually about 2 loop-de-loop lines, sometimes 3 in between the spider webs. It was a really good way to fill in, and we can maybe see some video of me actually quilting this as we're chatting about it, because it was just such a fun one to quilt, and it actually went really fast because these spider webs were pretty quick to do, and it just was a lot of fun, and it was a great way to connect everything. All right, this is Cross and Dot. It is in my book, Fat Quarter Patchwork Quilts. It was originally designed as a Stashin' with Stephanie quilt, and it was in the height of the beginning of the pandemic when I was homeschooling a kindergartner and had a newborn baby at home and was working on a book deadline. So it was pretty nuts, pretty intense. But so when, things come in and you've got to hurry up and get it done. And at the time you're only having one person in the building at a time to reduce spread, because before a vaccine was available. So I needed a design that I could get done quick. And so that ended up being the double loop meander, because it looks really cute. This is a really whimsical line. I was able to do it as a big all over design. And had I had more time, I 100% would have treated my blocks and my little dots that are created when you put the blocks together completely separate. Then I would have done my background, but time just did not allow for that because, as everybody knows, it was an insane time. And so it worked. It's super cute. It's a good example of when you do pick an all over design, you want to make sure that one, you're using a thread that is going to blend into your background so it doesn't detract. And then also that you are picking a design that fits with both the design of the quilt and the design of the fabric. This is a very whimsical design. It's fabric, there's cute little butterflies everywhere and birds. So a nice little fun flirty design is perfect for that. And we did a nice little medium-sized double loop meander, so we were able to have a lot of fun with that. We may have video of this. I'm not positive we were doing video at the time that I did this quilt or not, but if we do, we'll show it. But this pattern is Cross and Dot. You can get it in my book, Fat Quarter Patchwork Quilts, and we'll send you a signed copy if you grab it on our website. All right, I hope you have been enjoying these show and tell videos. I hope it gives you a really good idea of how you can use these really simple stitches that we're learning and customize them in so many different ways to make your quilts come to life. Whether you've got to get something done quick like this one, or maybe you have a little more time and you can do all the thread changes like in the one I just showed you where we were going up all the sides. We had a really simple quilting stitch, but because of all those thread changes, it really made it really cool and helped bring that fabric and that pattern to life. So you can do that. You have the power to do that with your quilting, and I hope you take advantage of it because it would be so much fun. One note, if you're doing a quilt like this and you want to do quilts as you go, keep in mind that this secondary design that's being created, when these come together, you are now going to have stashing in between that. So it's going to look a little different. It will still look super cool, especially if you get extra backing or background fabric. So keep that in mind too. Maybe always order an extra yard or two, depending on the size of your quilt, so that you've got enough to fill that in and use the same fabrics. But it's so fun. It's so cute. And I really hope you're enjoying this and you're getting all kinds of ideas on how you can finish that line of quilt tops you got in storage. I know we all have one, so check that out. Make sure you get the stencil pack so you can get the stitches down. And also make sure you grab a quilt kit so you can practice on solid fabrics first, so you can really see what you're doing, get the stitches down, and then just quilt to your heart's content on your quilt tops. All right, so grab your pattern, have fun, and when we come back, we are going to be doing the swirl. This is one of my favorites. I use it all the time. It's so versatile, so I can't wait to show it to you. Until next time, happy quilting.